Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. Chapter 3. When Oliver woke up the next day, he found that the painting of the woman on the wall had gone. "We took it down because it seemed to worry you," said Mrs. Bedouin. "But I liked it," protested Oliver. "Get well, then, Oliver, and we can put it back." A few days later, when Oliver was almost completely better, Mr. Brownlow bought him some new clothes. Then, one day, he sat down with Oliver and asked the boy about his life. Oliver started to tell Mr. Brownlow about his time at the workhouse, but suddenly there was a knock at the door. An old gentleman in a blue coat entered the room. "Oliver, this is my friend Mr. Grimwig," said Mr. Brownlow. "Hello, is this a boy you told me about?" said the man when he saw Oliver. "Yes," said Mr. Brownlow. And he began to tell Mr. Grimwig all about Oliver. He hadn't quite finished describing Oliver's life when Mrs. Bedouin came into the room with some books. "We need to pay for these new books, Mr. Brownlow," she said. "Send the boy to pay for them," said Mr. Grimwig. "Yes, do let me help you, sir," said Oliver. "Of course," said Mr. Brownlow. "Here is £5. Take the money to the bookshop. I need £1 change. Some of the books need to go back too." Oliver was very pleased to help Mr. Brownlow. He took the money, put the books under his arm, and then left. "Do you really think he will come back?" asked Mr. Grimwig. "Of course," said Mr. Brownlow. "Don't you? He has new clothes, some books, and £5. The boy will go straight to his friends, the thieves, and never come back. I am sure he will be back soon," said Mr. Brownlow. But he looked worried. Oliver was enjoying his walk to the bookshop when suddenly a strange woman grabbed him by the arm. "There you are," she said. "I have found him." "What are you stopping me for?" asked Oliver in surprise. "Let go of me." Some people in the street began to look at them. "He has run away from home," the woman explained to them. "I am taking him back to his mother and father." Then a man appeared who seemed to know the woman and said, "Come with me, Oliver, you bad boy." Oliver wasn't strong enough to run away, and he was led away by the man, who was Mr. Sikes, and the woman, who was Nancy. For half an hour, Oliver was led like this through busy streets until they reached an old shop. Oliver was taken inside, and there he saw Fagin, Charlie, and the Artful Dodger. When the boys saw him, they started laughing. "Look at his clothes and books. What a gentleman," laughed Charlie. "We must give you different clothes so those don't get dirty," said Fagin. "And I will have this £5 note for our troubles," said Mr. Sikes, taking the money from Oliver's pocket. "You can have the box, Fagin." "Please take the box and money back to Mr. Brownlow," said Oliver. "He has been so good to me. He will think I stole them." "You are right, Oliver. He will think you stole them," laughed Fagin. Oliver tried to escape, but Mr. Sikes held on to him and began to beat him with a stick. "Don't do that to the boy," cried Nancy. "He's already a thief like me." You have got his money. Leave him alone, or I'll call the police." Mr. Sikes looked surprised, but stopped hitting Oliver. "Take his clothes and lock him in a room," he said angrily. Oliver was kept in the room until the middle of the next day. When Fagin let him out, he told Oliver how kind he had been to him when he arrived in London. He also told Oliver that if he said anything to the police, things wouldn't be so good for him. A few days after Oliver had been taken back to Fagin's, Mr. Bummel was in London on the day that an advertisement came out in a newspaper. It asked for any information people had about a lost boy called Oliver Twist. Mr. Bummel read this with interest, then asked people how to find Mr. Brownlow's house. When he got there, he told him all he knew about the bad and difficult boy that he knew so well. "I told you he was a bad one," said Mr. Grimwig. "Sadly, you were right," said Mr. Brownlow. "I don't want to hear his name ever again." One day at Fagin's, the Artful Dodger asked Oliver to clean his boots. Oliver didn't like doing these things, but at least he had people to talk to. "Why don't you join our gang?" The Artful Dodger asked Oliver. "Take things and you will be rich. If you don't take people's watches, someone else will." "I would prefer to go back to Mr. Brownlow's," said Oliver. "Fagin won't like that," said Charlie. "He has plans for you." Indeed, at the same time in another house in London, Fagin was planning something for Oliver with Mr. Sikes, and he was going to do more than take people's watches. "We need a boy to help us to get inside a large house in the countryside," said Mr. Sikes. "Then use Oliver," said Fagin. "He will be just right for the job. Nancy can bring him to your house tonight." Oliver didn't expect to see Nancy when she arrived at Fagin's that evening. "You must come with me to Mr. Sikes' house," she said. "What for you?" "What for?" asked Oliver. "It is better that you don't ask," said Nancy. She looked at Oliver and could see that he was worried. "Look," she said, "I'm not happy about this either. I have tried to help you, but it's no good. I'll try and help you again, but this is not the time. Now, come with me." So Oliver had no choice, and he followed Nancy to Mr. Sikes's house. The next morning after breakfast, Mr. Sikes took Oliver by the hand and they set off into a cold, cloudy morning. They traveled all day, sometimes walking and sometimes going by coach. It was dark when they finally arrived at an old house somewhere in the country. Mr. Sikes didn't knock, but opened the door and they went inside. "Mr. Sikes?" said a voice. Oliver looked up and saw a man with long hair, who told him to sit by the fire. "Hello, Toby Cricket," said Mr. Sikes. "This is the boy who can help us tonight." "Good. Now let's rest by the fire," said Toby. The fire was warm and it had been a long day, so Oliver soon began to fall asleep. At 1:30 in the morning, Mr. Sikes woke Oliver up from a deep sleep. Oliver watched as Mr. Sikes and Toby each picked up a gun. Then they told him to go with them. They left the warm fireside and went outside into a dark night. They then walked for some time through the countryside. It was cold and Oliver didn't know where they were. Eventually, they stopped by a high brick wall. "Climb up," ordered Toby, and Oliver followed him up onto the wall. From the top of the wall, Oliver could see a large house in front of him and finally understood what they were going to do. They were going to break into the house. "Please, no, don't ask me to do this," Oliver cried. "Be quiet. Do as I tell you or there will be trouble," said Sykes menacingly. And he pointed to his gun to make sure Oliver understood what the trouble would be. Oliver followed the two thieves across the gardens to a small window at the bottom of the house. It was too small for any adult to climb through, but it wasn't too small for a child. They easily broke it open, and there was now a small space for Oliver to get into the house. "Take this light and go upstairs. Then you can open the front door for us," said Mr. Sykes. They pushed Oliver through the space in the window, and Oliver began to walk into the dark house. Suddenly, Oliver heard someone inside the house about something. Oliver heard someone inside the house shout something. Then there was a loud bang. "Come back!" cried Mr. Sykes, who took Oliver's arm and pulled him back through the space in the window. "What's happened?" Toby asked. "The boy's been shot," said Sykes. "Quick, quick, run!"